Chou Denki card battle Youfu Makai Kikuchi Hideyuki is the next game I'm taking a look at, and it's quite a mouthful. Before getting into the details, let's talk about this name, because it's a pretty long one and not everyone agrees on what the name is. Behind the scenes, I use a list from Japanese Wikipedia to determine the order in which the WonderSwan's library was released, and it has this game listed as the full name Kappa Games Chou Denki Card Battle Youfu Makai Kikuchi Hideyuki. Kappa Games is the video game sublabel of the publishing giant Kobunsha, which published this game, so I don't really consider it to be part of the name. Chou Denki is the combination of the superlative word chou, which is usually referring to very, super, or ultimate, and the literary term denki for romance. Not romance as in Harlequin novels, mind you, but the literary sense of the word, referring to a fictitious narrative in prose or verse, the interest of which turns upon marvelous and uncommon incidents. The same kanji used for denki are used in the adjective denki teki, which translates to legendary. Card battle should be pretty self-explanatory, it's the genre of the game. I'm going to skip Youfu Makai for just a second. Kikuchi Hideyuki is a name, more specifically the name of a prolific Japanese horror and sci-fi author most well known for the Vampire Hunter D series and Demon City Shinjuku. A lot of Western outlets didn't realize that this was somebody's name and tried to transliterate it as if it was any old word, and that means a lot of the Western world knows this name as Chou Denki Card Battle Youfu Makai Kikuchi Shugyo. Or more likely, one outlet mistransliterated it and everybody else copied them without checking first. What I'm saying here is I blame GameFAQs for this confusion. So let's go back to Youfu Makai, which is the core of the name here. 3 of the 4 kanji in this phrase are recurring motifs in the names of Kikuchi Hideyuki's works. Makai is demon world, and the yo in Youfu means bewitching. It's also the same yo as in yokai, which are supernatural monsters from Japanese folklore. Out of 44 distinct series listed on his Japanese Wikipedia page, 6 of them contain the word Makai, 14 of them contain the root kanji ma, or demon, 4 of them contain the kanji yo. Just to get my point across, one of them is even called the Yoma series. It's dumb, but it feels authentic and consistent with the rest of his works, even though it's a little bit on the nose. Youfu's not really a word you run into often, and it's very hard to find a translation for. Google Translate has no idea, it just spits the word right back at you. Japanese dictionaries aren't much help either. I tried piecing together the colloquial uses of both kanji, and it's somewhere in the realm of ghostly talisman or spiritual talisman. I tried finding usages of the word in context in Japanese on the web, but there aren't that many. The one place I found that I could cross-reference with an English localization was, hilariously enough, the skills list for Neo 2, which translates Youfu as Yokai Talisman for the Arch-Yokai Talisman 1 jutsu in the skill tree. So screw it, I'm gonna go with my own interpretation. Youfu Makai is Demon Realm of the Ghostly Talisman. If you're more versed in the world of Japanese literature than myself, then please go ahead and leave your interpretation in the comments, I'd love to hear it. So if you put everything back together, you get something vaguely resembling Kikuchi Hideyuki's Demon Realm of the Ghostly Talisman, a grandiose literary card battle. It was published by Kappa Games and released on December 16th, 1999. Yes, that was an incredibly long segment about the title of this game. You may notice that the art style in this game looks familiar, and that's because Kojima Ayumi, best known in the West for her work on the Castlevania series since Symphony of the Night, illustrated this game. In fact, she's drawn illustrations for 33 different Kikuchi Hideyuki novels from 1993 to 2013, and is the body of work that she's contributed most to in her entire career. It's only fitting that she also illustrated this game inspired by his works. Not unlike the various TCG video game adaptations that were popular at the time, Youfu Makai features the standard set of features you'd expect from this kind of game: a story mode, a CPU battle mode, a link cable battle mode, and deck customization. The story mode is the star of the show here. The screen resolution of the WonderSwan is put to good use here with nice large glyphs laid out right to left, making for easy reading. You can also flip back to previous pages if you missed something or accidentally skipped forward. There's also no shortage of interstitial illustrations as you read through the story. I'm by no means a Kikuchi Hideyuki scholar, but I know just enough to know that the setting in Youfu Makai overlaps with the setting of his 1982 debut fantasy horror novel, Makai Toshi Shinjuku, known internationally as Demon City Shinjuku, which was adapted into an animated OVA in 1988. In a devastating 8.5 magnitude earthquake known as the Devil Quake, Tokyo's Shinjuku ward became isolated from other wards with a crack forming a 200-meter gap around its border, and demons started pouring in from that crack. 3 suspension bridges are installed around Shinjuku ward to serve as entry gates at Yotsuya, Waseda, and Nishi Shinjuku. Youfu Makai tells of the legend of Yojimbo, the beautiful pale-skinned red-haired man on the cover of the game, riding up to the Nishishinjuku gate and being approached by a gatekeeper who was ominously shuffling a deck of cards from which they could summon monsters. That's right, this collectible card game is diegetic. Youfu Makai has you build a 30-card deck consisting of 2 different types of cards. Character cards, which represent mythical creatures that can be placed on the field to partake in combat, and special cards, which are effectively spells and are played directly from hand. The playfield is made out of 4 quadrants in which character cards can be played. On each player's turn, a player can put a character card in a free quadrant of the playfield or play a special card. At the center of the playfield is one of 3 elemental markers, and attached to it is a hand that spins around the board, clockwise by default. When that hand points to a character card, if that card's elemental type corresponds to the playfield's elemental type, combat occurs with the adjacent unit in the current rotation direction. If you play a special card, that card will have no effect unless its elemental type matches the playfield's current elemental type. Naturally, the playfield's elemental type changes over the course of a game. Whichever element has the most character cards on field at a given moment becomes the playfield's elemental type. In the case of a tie, whichever element was played onto the field first has priority. Combat is incredibly bare bones in this game. A character card has a single number, its card points, or CP for short. This single resource is both that card's health and attack power. When a card gets damaged, the CP of that card gets reduced permanently, and therefore it will deal less damage with its next attack. When its points drop to 0, the card is destroyed and the quadrant becomes free. Whoever manages to place a character card in all 4 quadrants of the playfield at once wins the game. Cards are also double-sided, with the reverse side having a different element and number of card points. Some special cards will let you flip cards over, which give you a way of virtually recovering card points if the front side of your card has been weakened, or play intentionally weak front sides of monsters onto the board to get your opponent to play in a certain way and then flip them over to reveal a devastating boss monster. One of the things that stood out to me about Youfu Makai's mechanics was how it seemed to be a streamlined derivative of Monster Collection's terrain mechanic, purposefully simplified for limited screen real estate. Monster Collection was the second-place trading card game in Japan during the mid-90s, behind the Pokemon trading card game. Each zone on the playfield could have a terrain card played on it that would modify the effects or attributes of any other card played atop of it. In retrospect, this mechanic led to very messy and confusing board states, so most mechanics inspired by this in other games, such as Field Magic in the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG or Stadium cards in the Pokemon TCG, would make terrain changes a global effect instead of merely affecting a single zone. There's a shocking amount of polish in this game. There are a ton of gorgeous illustrations throughout the whole thing. The deck customization screen lets you read flavor text for all of the cards in here, which is a detail that's incredibly easy to miss and something we've definitely grown used to being cut from video game adaptations of trading card games from that era. The one place where Youfu Makai is surprisingly unpolished is in the out-of-box experience. I found a scan of the manual for this game on the Internet Archive, and the last page states that you absolutely must reset the save data after purchasing it for the game to play correctly. They weren't lying. Friend of the show Kimimi was trying to play this game this week on both real hardware and on an emulator, and both returned absolutely garbled graphics and crashing until she manually reset the save data. Speaking of which, y'all should really follow Kimimi and her blog if you don't already, because she does absolutely amazing work. While it's nice to see experimentation with card games on the WonderSwan, I found Youfu Makai's game design to be quite punishing. One complaint I hear a lot about TCGs like Magic and Pokemon, which rely on resource cards such as land and energy to play cards or activate effects, is the frustration you feel when you don't draw enough of them to execute your game plan. Youfu Makai is much more frustrating in that whether or not your cards do anything at all is dictated by both you and your opponent's opening hands. If your opponent's starting hand contains 2 character cards of the same element, and your opener is 3 special cards of any other element, there's a good chance the game is just over, because none of your cards will do anything once your opponent gets a creature on the board, and you're just wishing for a lucky top deck. Unlike resource cards in other TCGs, there's not much you can do during the deck building process to mitigate this unless you're specifically customizing your deck for each opponent you play against. This is made worse by only being able to save a single deck at a time, which means you have to do a lot of juggling in a really clunky deck customization UI. At the very least, I feel that this game would be far less frustrating to play if special cards had a baseline effect regardless of their element. You practically have to include all 3 elemental versions of the same effect in your deck, but it sucks when you then draw the wrong elemental version of that effect when you needed it most. It's also just a baffling design decision to make a game where approximately 2/3 of your deck is a dead draw at any given moment. Youfu Makai is an interesting snapshot of the experimental period in collectible card games when Japan was still figuring out how they wanted to approach the genre in the late 90s. I suspect that if this game had been designed in paper with hope for longevity, a lot of the issues with its game design would have been patched over before hitting shelves, and it would be a much better game because of it. As it stands, I can't really recommend the game to anyone hoping for a mechanically satisfying portable collectible card game, and let's be honest, the Game Boy is always going to be the place for that, but it was still interesting enough to get my game designer senses firing on all cylinders for a couple hours.